count the number of genes for genetic diversity, we also have to take into account the number of alleles as well that is possessed by each gene in a population. So here, if you talk about in the sense of genes only, then we say that it has a higher genetic diversity, as it has 60 different genes, it has 55 different genes. But we just have to consider the allelic frequency as well. I mean, how many alleles we possess here. So here, these 60 genes have the potential of variations of phenotypic expression, which is about 170 different forms. And if we compare here, here's a greater number of alleles per gene. The proportion of genes which have more alleles is higher. I'm repeating, the proportion of genes which have higher number of alleles are higher in community 2, because 20 genes have 6 alleles, so its combination is 225 allelic combination, I mean phenotypic expression. So the bigger the allele combination, the higher will be the chances of evolution, the higher will be the chances of mutation. And we say this genetic diversity is very fruitful for evolution. So yes, we say that community 2 has a bigger genetic diversity as compared to community 1 or in a habitat. So this is all about we talk about the second level of biodiversity, which is called genetic diversity. So up till now, we talked about the biodiversity. I told you that biodiversity is the variant forms of life, and this variant form of life can be classified into 3 different levels. In the first level is the species diversity, because the first priority we just have to keep in mind about the existence of different types of individuals belong to different species. So we will count the number of variation, the number of different species in different communities. But when you talk about the species diversity, we take into account about the species richness, which is the total number of species in a community. And we also talk about the species abundance, because how many individual per species exist in that community, and we will add up, so we get the total abundance. And then we also look about the distribution of the organisms in a community, how much they are evenly distributed. If they are more evenly distributed, even the number is not so greater, but they are located everywhere in relatively closer relative abundance, so we have a big diversity. There should be no domination by any one of the species, which represents the species diversity of the first level of the biodiversity. And second, as I told you about the genetic diversity, so it's also take into account 2 factors: the number of genes in the community, and about the proportion of genes having greater number of alleles. So the product might be have a higher genetic diversity in the sense of allelic combination, different phenotypic expressions, so they have a greater chances of evolution. That's about the genetic diversity. Now let's move to the third level of biodiversity. The third level is ecological diversity. Ecological diversity. Ecological diversity. Now, what is meant by ecological diversity? Ecological diversity not only focused on the existence of species and their genes, but also the way of interacting with their environment. There should be different ways, there should be different methods, there should be different techniques for the organisms to interact with one another, as well as with their surrounding, non-living environment. I mean, intensity of light, availability of water, salinity, pH, humidity. So different factors which can also affect the existence of species. In other words, we can say that the greater the variations in a particular habitat, variation in the sense of ecological features like if there's changes in temperature frequently, and there should also changes in droughtness. There should be sometime heavy rain, sometime light rain, sometime coldness, sometime hotness. Frequently, there's a lot of variation. So there is a possibility that different type of species can exist in the same habitat. But if there's a stable environment and there's no changes in the environment for a longer period of time, I mean, more than 100 years and 80 years, the climate of a particular area is constant, stable. So only those species will live in there which are adapted to that particular surrounding. And any change in that environment can bring about some other species which have a mutation for adaptability of the new environment. But simply, in simple words, I just want to say, you know about the ecosystem and you know about the food web. In food web, we say like, first of all, we talk about the food chain. A food chain is, is a series of organisms linked together for the transfer of food and energy in a systematic way. So each organism is called a trophic level, and one organism gets energy and food from the other one linked together. Each trophic level is represented by an arrow, and the head of the arrow is directed toward the organism which has been used as a source of energy. Like A depends on B, B depends on C, and C depends upon D. So A is the main source in this food chain. It supplies energy to B, and then B, I mean, if it's a plant, so these are the organisms which are dependent on plants, C dependent on B, and D dependent on C. Now in this food, this is a very simple food chain. If there's another food chain as well, like we say X, Y, Z, and this Z can also get energy from C. And similarly, Y is also dependent on A. So in such cases, we say that for Y, there are two ways of interacting. Y can also take energy and food from the X, and as well as from A. So we say that here in this food chain, there's only two ways for the interaction of species Y. If for some reason this species has been declined, then it will change its route and get energy from X. So it means the more complex the food web, if there are many food chains linked together through a complex series, there will be many more ways of interacting of one organism with the other one to get energy. So we said that the ecological diversity of that environment, of that climate, of that community, of that habitat should be higher. Different ways of it. And that is only possible if there are many food chains. And for many food chain, we have a lot of different types of organisms which are linked together. And there should be a lot of variation in species density as well as in species richness. And interaction, there should be also considered abiotic factors, which is environment. If environment is suitable for each and every organism, it's not possible that each and every organism will be adapted to each and every environment. There should be different types of environmental pressure if we want to exist, if we want to select different types of organisms in a particular place. So there should be a variation. Like I'm just giving you one example of Madagascar. About the Madagascar, it says that it has a great diversity in their species. Why? Because the environmental features in Madagascar are quite different, and we have some unique species there which cannot exist in any other part of the world because of variations in the environmental features. So to keep in view all these things in mind, I just want to briefly summarize. When you talk about the ecological diversity, it means you just not only to focus on the biotic factors, I mean, how many species there, how many gene pool there, you just also have to keep in mind about the interaction of